Chapter 231 Surfacing of Fear. Hiro had a stupefied look on his face, while his mother had a worried look on her face, as if she was on the verge of crying. And as he finished his words, his mother's moist eyes could no longer hold back her tears as it burst forth like collected water bursting from a dam after its collapse. With eyes full of tears, she threw herself in Hiro's arms and embraced him tightly. Although she threw herself on his arms, she was careful enough not to hurt him. For some instants, Hiro was dumbfounded by her sudden reaction. He couldn't understand why she was acting like this. Finally, "You woke up, Sobi. Sobi. I was so worried about you, Sobi. Sobi." She wept like a child as she expressed her concerns while shuddering. Only then did Hiro realize how much trouble he had caused her. While he was sleeping soundly, each and every moment she was suffocating from his worry. At this moment, he no longer cared about his condition. He no longer cared about his inner age. He just wrapped his arms around her back as he started weeping himself as well. "Sorry, Mom. Sobi. Sobi. I'm sorry for worrying you. Sobi. Sobi." While one expressing her worries and another apologizing, both of them cried like kids as both of them held each other in their embrace. The two of them remained in this state until their tears dried. His father, who had arrived at the room when they were still weeping like kids, was touched upon seeing them in such state. Thus he left without saying anything, refusing to interrupt their touching moment. Outside the window, little white flakes of snow, while falling from the dark heaven, seemed like it was dancing in the frigid air. With no traces of sun or the blue sky, today's sky was completely veiled by the dark snow clouds. However, the view outside the window was still breathtaking to look at. The building and the trees stood adorned with glistening white coats, and their sharp edges was softened by the blanket of the snow. Although relatively warm, Hiro, who was watching the scene outside the window, could feel the refreshing chill from the snow penetrating his body. Just like the world outside the window, with the absence of his parents and hospital staffs, his room was completely silent. At this moment, while looking outside the window, his thoughts wandered to the moment where he learned about the talent which was going to be forfeited. Since Host has failed to complete the quest, as a means of punishment, your talent Roberto Carlos's free kick will be forfeited. Sigh. Thinking about the moment where he lost one of his talent, Hiro let out a deep sigh and frowned his brows. At least it's not other talents. Although it helped me a lot, and combined with my another talent Ambipedal, its lethality had increased even further, but at least it's still better than losing other talents, murmured Hiro while weighing the pros and cons of losing the talent. Although he was sad, he wasn't devastated. However, I did lose some stat points too, so it's a little concerning. But I guess I should still be happy. I mean, it could have been even worse if I had lost the talent Ambipedal or passing sense of Kevin De Bruyne. If I had lost any of those two talent, my stats would have been reduced significantly, murmured Hiro, sounding a bit thankful. As mentioned by Hiro, because he only lost his talent, Roberto Carlos's free kick, which was more like a skill given its uses, he was actually quite glad that the system didn't take his other talents, which would have been quite detrimental to his growth, considering he was soon going to participate in U17 World Cup, which was going to be held in Indonesia. If he could perform well in this tournament, not only will he be able to recuperate his losses, he could also advance one step even more closer to his dream. Thinking about the World Cup, his frowns suddenly disappeared as his eyes glowed with determination. That's right, what has happened. I can't change the past, but I can definitely change my future. But just as he determinedly spoke about changing his future, the image of his older self sitting in the wheelchair flashed in his mind. That dream was so vivid that remembering about it still gave him chills. And as such a cold sweat ran down his spine as he imagined about his sickly older self sitting in the wheelchair, lamenting his life and thinking about giving his life. This life will be different. I have attained many things which I couldn't attain in my previous life. It will be different, thought Hiro as he tried to console himself that his present life would be different. Although he was thinking so, somewhere in his heart, he knew that he was still afraid about failure. He was afraid to see him in that same miserable situation. He could even imagine his current image overlapping with his sickly older image. Before now, after regressing, he hadn't thought much about failure since he had been achieving success nonstop, but right now as he laid in his hospital bed with his body wrapped in bandages, he was starting to think about failure. Getting hospitalized had triggered his inner fears. Currently, his situation was like that of an eagle on the verge of its first death. There's a saying that says that eagle has two lives. Well, obviously they only live once. But as eagle approaches the age of 40, its once long and sharp beak starts to bend, its long and flexible talons can no longer catch prey, and its heavy wings start to stick to their chest, making it difficult to fly. Basically, after 40, it starts heading to the death door. One may assume that it's because they're approaching the end of their lifespan. But it's not the case, since their lifespan is about 70 years, which is the longest among any other bird species. So why would it approach its doom only after living half of its lifespan? The reason is rather simple. It's because the heaven don't allow anything to thrive continuously without suffering. Only after suffering will one be able to rise. There's no success without suffering. Great players spend thousands of hours in training, tormenting their body. Do they not feel pain? Do they not feel like giving up? Who wouldn't feel like giving up when the time gets tougher? Having been born as mortal, we all would want to give up at hard times. But what sets great people apart from normal people is that great personalities perseveres through tough times, while normal ones will succumb to the tough times. Chapter 232, Recuperation. And as Eagle approaches its doom despite living only about half of its lifespan, it's left with two choices. One is to die, and another is to go through a lengthy, painful process of breaking its beak, claws, and wings to have a chance to live for yet another 30 years. Right now, just like an eagle in its foreties, Hiro was left with two options. Either to succumb to his fear and become a mediocre, or face his fear and come out victorious. Now the choice was entirely up to Hiro. In life, everybody's presented with such choices. Be it players or common folks, abled or disabled, everybody receives such do or die choices in their life. Right at this moment, while Hiro was contemplating about his future, his parents entered the room. Walking inside the room, the two of them headed straight towards Hiro. "We've got your coach's permission. Let's go home," his mother said in a gentle tone while revealing a sweet smile on her face, breaking the eerie silence in the room. With the conclusion of the final match between the champions of the East League and West League, the season had came to an end, which meant that they didn't have any other matches until the beginning of new season. And, taking his injuries into consideration, it was much more suitable for him to head home instead of going back to hostel. Thus, without any sort of hesitation, Hiro agreed to his parents' request and replied, let's head home," while nodding his head. Obviously, his parents had already applied for his sick leave from school as well. For about a week, after he got discharged from the hospital, he spent his time in his home resting and recuperating his injured body. In that time period, he didn't perform any kind of strenuous task which put strain to his body. However, just because he didn't perform any strenuous tasks didn't mean he simply laid down in his bed from morning to noon, idling. Although a little painful, he wasn't bedridden and could walk from the day he got discharged from the hospital. Thus, he spent his time wisely. Sleeping not more than 10 hours, he allocated his time in different segments. After waking up, he did some flexibility exercises and yoga to increase his mobility and flexibility. After that, he'd freshen up and head to the kitchen to get something to eat. Obviously, he only ate healthy meals for better recovery. During daytime, he even started self-studying. Although he often dozed midway while studying, at least he started putting efforts. Then, after studying for a while, he watched some matches, mostly World Cup matches, since the World Cup 2022 was still ongoing at the moment. Although Japan had already been knocked out by Croatia, he still followed every match. But not for the purpose of entertainment, since he already knew about the results. But for the purpose of learning, he watched those matches. And just like that, at evening time, he once again did some rehabilitation exercises. Finally, before sleeping, he meditated for a while to increase his focus and to stabilize his mind and body. That's how he spent his time, every day repeating the same course of actions. Right now, he was sitting at the living room in front of the television screen, accompanied by his father. Along all this year, one thing which remained static was his father's habit of drinking beer while watching football matches. "So who do you think will win today?" his father questioned him in a cheerful tone. His eyes reflecting the light from the TV screen, Takashi's flushed red face was brimming with joy at the moment. Holding a can of beer in his hand, Takashi was currently comfortably sitting beside his son, waiting for the start of the final match of World Cup 2022, which was happening between two powerhouse teams, each competing to add a third star in their respective jersey. One side being led by a young emerging star, while the other side being led by a veteran star who was on the verge of retirement. Some people were calling it a match between new and older generation, while some people were calling it the match that was going to rewrite the history. Captivating the hearts of people of every nation, almost more than half the population of the world was paying attention to this very match right now. Arguably the greatest sporting event in the history of the world. It was the final match of the FIFA World Cup 2022 between France, the defending champion, and Argentina, the new challenger. Currently, it was already dark outside, but flocks of people could be seen in almost every public places, especially in bars and restaurants. Even though their country had already been knocked out, a lot of Japanese people were also paying attention to this match in the television screen right now. The brightly illuminated streets of Japan was echoing with chatters and cheers of people at the moment. Faced with his father's question, Hiro smiled inwardly as he started imagining his father's disappointed face after some moments. He knew who his father was rooting at the moment. He was supporting France. His eyes brimming with confidence, Hiro answered smugly. Obviously, it's Argentina. Looking at his son's smug face and listening to his son's confident tone, Takashi burst into laughter as he declared his support for France. Haha. Then I'm going to support France. Let's see who will win this time. Right at this moment, his mother walked in while carrying a bowl full of freshly cut fruits in her hand. Squinting her eyes, she coldly stared at his father, giving him side-eye. If stares could stab, then Takashi would have been stabbed by 100 swords right now. Clearly, she was annoyed by Takashi. She wasn't annoyed because of his cheerful laughter, but because Takashi was acting drunk at the moment. Takashi, who was totally engrossed in the television screen, didn't notice her gazes. Completely carefree, he continued to laugh and comment. And only when she appeared close to him did he notice her presence. Noticing her presence, Takashi's cheerful smile turned into nervous smile. Still, he didn't dare to speak anything rashly. Momo stared at Takashi coldly as she spoke in a cold manner. I'm only allowing you to drink freely because of Hiro, but if you continue to act like this, I might have to go back on my words. Listening to her words and looking at her icy cold gaze, Takashi felt chills as he felt like his body was getting invaded by an invisible chilly aura, making him shudder. Chapter 233 Vila Miséria. As much as Takashi loved his wife, he also feared her. Upon hearing her harsh words, Takashi shrunk his body as he tried to avoid making eye contact with his wife. Currently, Takashi's state was like that of a dog who was scolded harshly by its owner. Just like a dog tugging its tails, Takashi tugged his laughter and loud voice. Although Hiro sympathized with his father's sorry state, right now he mused silently upon witnessing his father's sorry state. Not because he enjoyed seeing his father in such state, but because he felt grateful being born in such a good family. Obviously, physically his father was stronger than his mother. So one may question why he would endure such scoldings and naggings. However, the answer is rather simple. The reason why his father acts so docile against his mother is because he loves her. To others it may seem like torture, but to him, it has become a kind of love language. To him, her nagging has become some kind of weird music which, although sounds irritating, he still wants to hear it. His mother then retreated her gazes and turned towards Hiro. Probably because of his injuries, she had become even more softer to him in recent days. Always giving him warm smiles, she had been doting him a lot in these recent days. At this moment too, upon facing Hiro, she lifted the corner of her lips as she revealed a gentle warm smile on her face. Her icy cold eyes was now radiating a feeling of warmth, and her once tensed brows were now arched. In a mere second, she had completely changed her facial expression. Eat this fruits while watching the match, but make sure to hit the bed right after the end of the match, okay? She spoke in her gentle tone, smiling at Hiro. Probably anyone who heard her words and witnessed her smile at this moment would assume that she spoke such words out of concern and would probably fail to detect anything else. But Hiro, who knew his mother like the back of his hand, could see beyond that smile and beyond those gentle tone. As much as it was question out of concern, it was also a warning to him, meaning if he didn't sleep right after the end of the match, she'd kick his ass. Knowing the meaning of her words, Hiro silently nodded his head. Don't worry, Mom. I will head to bed right after the end of the match. After hearing his reply, she smiled at him, and once again, she looked at his father. Honey, make sure to send him to bed right after the end of the match, okay? As she spoke such, she looked at him threateningly. It was a clear indication that if she found Hiro awake till late night, even he'd share part of Hiro's beatings. Not daring to face his wife, Takashi gulped some of his saliva and docilely nodded his head. Getting her husband's approval, her mood lightened. She then turned around, preparing to leave the room. But just as she turned around, Takashi grumbled, "If you are this worried about him, why don't you stay and watch him?" Although his voice was muffled, his mother still heard his father's grumble. "Did you say something, honey?" Pretending a smile on her face, she asked him politely, her eyes burning with rage. If one looked at her right now, one could see two horns growing out her head. Takashi immediately shook his head as he shuddered. No, I didn't say anything. I just said good night, honey." Currently, his drunk face was all sober, and perspiration could be seen on his forehead. Clearly, he was shit scared. Hearing Takashi's reply, she smiled at him and turned to leave. Looking at her leaving figure, Takashi finally heaved a sigh of relief. But the next moment, his mother paused her movement right at the foot of the door. "I'll only watch such matches once my son plays in it." Hearing her voice, Takashi's heart sank as he started to panic once again. Misery Village, Argentina. In the southernmost part of the city of Buenos Aires lied a crampy neighborhood called Misery Village, also famously known as Villa Miseria. A stark contrast to the tall, majestic buildings not far away from its location, it's filled with the thick stench of poverty. Along with ramshackle, crampy concrete buildings closely built next to each other, many other houses built of sheets of rusty metals, woods, and salvage materials could also be seen in this neighborhood. Because of the houses and buildings constructed in such a disorganized manner, the winding path in this neighborhood were rather narrow and confusing, making it seem like a large maze if looked from above. Puddles and piles of garbage were like its special features, which could be seen almost everywhere. Mismanaged electric wires, which run down through the entire neighborhood, was like its blood vessels. Right now, with the sun on the verge of setting down, most of its houses was starting to light in dim yellow colors. While most of its alleyways in absence of light was starting to look sinister, under the presence of the light of street lamps, some walls of the neighborhood, which was covered with graffiti, was looking extremely exquisite right now. And with the arrival of the night, more and more houses was being lit with yellow and orange hues. Even so, despite the descent of the darkness, some streets of the neighborhood was starting to become livelier. Large number of kids of all age could be seen playing football in roads and open spaces under the yellow light of the street lamps. As such, in one of the cramped alley, some bunch of kids could be seen playing football currently. At each side of the alley, a single stone could be seen erected, probably acting as goalpost at this moment. The lights coming from the street lamps were rather dim, and shadows of buildings, fences, objects, and people could be seen all over the rough, stony surface. To the back of the post, where there were no street lamps, it was completely pitch black. And right now, at this alley, at this moment, a black-haired kid whose face was half covered with mask was running along with the ball. In his side, there stood only a keeper, while in front of him stood 5 other kids, ganging upon him. His face half covered with mask only revealed his eyes, which was glowing yellow, while reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. Chapter 234, 1 verses 5. Each of their eyes glowing with indignance, and each one of them staring at him with bloodshot eyes, while emitting bloodthirsty aura around them. It was evident from their reaction that they weren't on good terms with the hooded boy. Suddenly, out of those 5 kids who were blocking his path, 3 of them rushed towards the hooded kid with the ball at the same time. The hooded boy's eyes, however, looked indifferent as he skillfully evaded the reach of those 3 boys who were aggressively charging at him. With 3 of their teammates beaten, 2 other guys were the only remaining ones among those 5 kids, exchanged quick glances with each other before rushing upfield. Just then, after reaching close to the hooded boy, one of them slided down to tackle him, while the other concealed himself behind that guy who slid down. Tapping the ball lightly with his right foot, he lifted the ball above the legs of the guy who just slid down, in turn getting past the reach of that guy who just slid down. That guy who just got beaten clicked his tongue in frustration as he smacked his fist on the ground furiously. However, just as he got past the 4th guy, another guy with a massive frame stretched his legs towards him. He wasn't aiming at the ball. Instead, he was aiming at his legs. Even so, he didn't look worried in the slightest. With the same indifferent look in his eyes, he quickly swayed his body to the left along with the ball. For a moment, it seemed like that the ball was glued to his feet. Even that guy who wanted to foul him was bewildered by his reaction speed. The hot boy avoided a lethal foul by a hair's breadth. At this moment, a cold light flashed in his eyes as he looked at the direction where the slab of brick was erected. Without losing the momentum, he then executed a beautiful Rabona, in turn kicking the ball towards the erected slab of brick. The ball then, as it left his feet, flew towards the slab of brick. Clack! A clasping sound of brick against the concrete paved ground echoed in the alley as the ball sent the brick flying after coming in contact with the brick. Just as the brick fell down, his hood got lifted, revealing his messy long blonde hair and his sharp sword like thick eyebrows. His forehead, neither too big nor too small, and his reddish-white skin glowed golden while reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. His azure-blue pupils looked even more fierce and cold as he indifferently gazed at the direction of the ball. Suddenly, while he was staring at the fallen slab of brick, a cheerful voice echoed in his ear from behind him. That was damn amazing Mateo. That was the name of the hot boy. Despite half of his face being concealed with a black mask, one could tell, just by looking at his piercing gaze, that he wasn't someone who could be trifled with. Mateo then turned around as he heard the voice which was coming from behind him. It was the voice of the guy who was guarding his post. Small in stature, he was currently ecstatically jumping up and down while praising Mateo's skills of the moment. Mateo, however, ignored the praises of the boy with small stature. Instead, he slowly walked towards the guy who just now tried to foul him. Mateo then coldly glared at the guy with big frame while extending his arms. The guy with big frame felt indignant as he pursed his lips. While reaching his hands inside his pocket, he felt a surge of anger rising within him. Even so, without uttering a single word while glaring at Mateo with his bloodshot eyes, he hesitatingly took out some money from his pockets. Exactly 1,000 peso bill, and handed to Mateo. His hands shook as he gritted his teeth while handing the money to Mateo. Mateo, however, without retreating his gazes, indifferently took the money from his hands. More like he snatched the money, since the boy with big frame looked reluctant to let go of his money. Compared to boy in front, Mateo's body frame was much smaller. Only about 163 centimeters tall, Mateo had a lean body. Even so, right now while snatching the money from the hands of a boy with bigger frame. Almost twice of his own. He didn't have any fear in his eyes. It was like hyena snatching lion's prey. And as he collected money from that boy with huge frame, he approached other four guys and collected 1,000 peso bills from each one of them. Just as he collected money from each one of them and was about to walk away, one of the boys sneered, "Mateo Gomez will remember this humiliation." His face reddish and his eyes bloodshot. His voice filled with rage sounded bone-chilling at the moment. And although the face of the boy walking beside Mateo turned pale after hearing that voice, Mateo showed no change in his expression. However, hearing the voice, Mateo paused as he slowly turned around. Stretching his hands, Mateo then took off his mask, revealing his bare face. Several small bruised and cut marks could be seen in Mateo's face. Especially one apparent scar which stood out than the rest made him look extremely terrifying. As if he was hacked by a knife, a scar stretched from below his eyes to his upper cheeks. Although the wound looked like it was from long ago, given the condition of the scar, it still made his appearance extremely terrifying to look at. Coldly glaring at those five guys, Mateo scoffed harshly. "Then remember this face when you come to find trouble next time." Coupled with the terrible wound on his face, his cold voice gave chills to those five guys present there at the moment. Some of their legs even softened as they heard and looked at him. As if he was not a human, but a demon, Mateo's appearance was extremely horrifying to look at under the dim light. Chapter 2:35 Tattered Old House. Trepidation reflecting in his eyes and his mouth opening and closing, again and again, as if he was having trouble speaking his hearts, coupled with his irregular breathing and face full of perspiration. It seemed like that the boy who sneered at Mateo a moment ago was startled to his core at the moment upon seeing Mateo's bare face and hearing Mateo's voice. Every single one of them were tongue-tied at the moment. From their reaction, one could tell that nobody among them had seen Mateo's bare face previously. Thus right now, upon seeing Mateo's horrifying face, every single one of them were startled at the moment. Mateo then sneered at them as he shrugged and veiled his face with the mask again. Without saying anything, Mateo then started to leave. Looking at Mateo's leaving figure, finally those five kids heaved a sigh of relief as they mustered their courage and started to scoff about Mateo. "So that's why he's wearing mask, huh? He looks freaking ugly. That grotesque face gave me chills. But still, that fucker won the bet and took our money." Gritting his teeth, one of the guys sneered as he stared at Mateo's leaving figure with bloodshot eyes. Without looking back, Mateo and the other guy kept on walking. After some moment, those two disappeared from their sight as they blended in the darkness of the alley. Curious about Mateo's earlier action, the guy with small stature who was walking beside him had a complicated look on his face. "Why did you show them your face today, Mateo?" asked the boy, unable to hold himself back any longer. "If I hadn't strike them first, then they would have strike us instead. And compared to them, we were far outnumbered. Not only will they have beaten us, they'd even have snatched our hard-earned money," spoke Mateo in a profound way. As mentioned by Mateo, situation would have indeed turned ugly if he hadn't acted that way. Showing his face horrified those boys, making them lose their composure for some moment, which in turn provided Mateo and his friend some leeway to escape. By showing his face and by revealing his intentions, Mateo once again avoided a predicament today. It wasn't his first time acting in such a way. Growing up in slum, he had understood that to survive in this harsh environment, one must be ruthless and fearless. The one who gets scared gets picked on most. The one who shows weakness gets trampled. That's what he had learned after countless beating. And even in that moment, he might not have been their match, but if they had dared to strike him, he'd have fought back regardless. Hearing Mateo's words, the guy with small stature frowned his brows as he spoke in a muffled voice. "We should probably stop," betting Mateo. Mateo, however, kept his mouth shut as he pretended to ignore his rants. Although the heaven hadn't blessed him with good fortune, it had still blessed Mateo with footballing talents. And he'd have been making fool out of himself if he wasn't using his talents. Now one must wonder why, with such talents, he wasn't playing for any clubs or playing football professionally. It's not that he didn't wish to play professionally. In fact, he had tried out for local clubs previously. But since youth players can't earn anything in youth clubs, he had given up on the chance to play for clubs. "I know that you have told me the reason, but still with your talents, why don't you play football professionally?" asked the boy while deeply looking at Mateo. Mateo, however, spoke nothing and took out the money which he had won a moment ago. He then handed 1,000 bill to the boy and left without saying anything. Bewilderment, sorrow, and indignance. With such mixed emotions, the boy fixedly looked at Mateo's leaving figure while continuously blinking his eyes. "We can't pay you much, Mateo. The most we can pay you right now is $5 per week and $1 per goal." A middle-aged man spoke with a concerned look on his face, his gaze reflecting his helplessness and his tone extremely sincere. Mateo, who looked a lot smaller right now, helplessly gazed at the middle-aged man with expectant eyes. "Sir, can't you increase it a little more? I really need money," Mateo begged helplessly. "Mateo, I know how talented you are, but it's the maximum amount our club can pay you. You know, right, youth players don't get paid? In fact, most youth players even have to pay instead. However, considering your talent, we are breaking the rules. But we can't raise the price any more than this, Mateo." The middle-aged man who was currently speaking with Mateo helplessly sighed as he tried to convince Mateo. "Unless you start to play for the main team, we can't really pay you, Mateo," continued the middle-aged man. Suddenly, as he spoke those words, the figure of the middle-aged man and the environment around Mateo started to get hazy. Soon as the fog in his sight cleared, Mateo found himself in front of a small tattered house made up of brick and rusty metal sheets. Creaking from the tiny holes of the metal sheets and from space beneath the door, yellow light was creaking out. Why am I remembering that scene again?" murmured Mateo as he stood in front of a tattered wooden door in front of a tiny old house. His gaze is looking at the yellow light coming from the house and his feet frozen in front of the house. Clearly, he was hesitating to go inside for some reason. Even so, despite not feeling good walking towards the house in front, Mateo strode forward. Creak! The fence-like wooden door made creaking noises as Mateo pushed it. Woof! Woof! Hearing the creaking noises, some street dogs started barking. After entering, Mateo tried to push the main door of the house from where the light was creaking outside. The door, however, was locked from the inside. Thus, he started to knock on the door. Knock! Knock! "Who's this?" A voice came from the inside. The voice sounded feminine, meaning it was a voice of female. "Alexia, it's me, Mateo," answered Mateo as he stood outside the door. Soon after he answered, he heard someone opening the door. And as the door opened, a figure of a small girl, probably about 11 or 12-year-old, emerged from within the house. Silky smooth blonde hair which cascaded down her head towards her shoulder like waterfall, innocent-looking azure blue eyes, reddish-white skin tone, and a little flushed cheeks. She was Mateo's younger sister, Alexia. "Why do you always come home late, Mateo?" concernedly spoke Alexia.